one of the editors of the book. Dr. Tonelli and Dr. Egido, they are also here in the Zoom link. So I'm going to start. Dr. Faltis is going to be the next, then Juliana and Alex, and that'll be the third one. And then I'm going to have the discussions with Zonfag, Dr. Zonfag. That's it. Okay, can we start? Okay, so hello.
We're all.
Oh, we're all. Do they see her? She's over here.
No. It's from the computer. The computer's again.
Oh, the computer. Gotcha.
Okay, now it goes. Okay, I'll be starting with the title of our book. So the Latin America Writes Back, and then I'm going to be starting by talking about why writing back as a critical practice. So this book there are 9 chapters. We bring examples of writing back as a form of engaging in a critical praxis against the colonial and the Eurocentric schooling. And the focus is that we validate the ideological and programmatic challenge, the policy gaps, demonstrating that resistance must feed from the teacher's local praxis. We have chapters here from Paraguay, Ecuador, Mexico, and some from Brazil. And when we engage in this writing back process, we want to be uncover the human movement. We want to be questioning the global north supremacy. And in our book, we engage in some pillars. The first one is agents, questioning, valuing the local, and the global practices. So we engage here in the Paulo Freire philosophy of praxis, in which we have all the teacher acts in the classroom, but through reflection, we are going to be in a kind of cycle. So it's always something that we do our practice, we reflect, we change our practice, always valuing the local praxis. So the education is through a praxiology in which is nurtured by the daily classroom reflection action. It is transformative engagement, cultivating the critical conscience, and we want students and teachers as an active agents on their own lives and learning. And we bring here a dialogue for self-identification, moving beyond the banking education. So here are some of the chapters and their a visual representation of their chapters. So we have the first chapter of Dr. Canese and Dr. Faltis about the ideological clarity in the Paraguay contest. And then you have a curriculum in Mexico in which they have an ideal curriculum, but the reality on the classroom is very different. And then you have several from Brazil. We have chapter 3, teaching English to younger learners, from Dr. Tonelli and Dr. Egido, and we also have chapters talking about how they work with refugee education in Brazil. There's some no organization institutions that support refugee education. Sorry. No, the PowerPoint is not going. Okay, we have some core themes in this decoloniality in language education. So we are confronting the colonial legacies. We are valuing the indigenous languages. We are working for the local knowledge, context specific versus the imported curriculum from European and from Europe. We have the teacher agents. We have the ideological clarity and humanizing education. And our central argument here is that language education must be context sensitive, critically reflective and humanizing, and a blind application of predetermined methods from the Global South. So, but why this book? Why this matter? So in this book, we bring some grounded alternatives, real concrete classroom example from the global South, Latin America. They are based on real classrooms. We question assumptions. We want to challenge assumptions by asking whose knowledge counts and whose practice matter. And we engage here in a decolonial attitude, leaning toward a decolonial approach to education. We want to increase awareness and follow in a narrowed focus by continue from the local language to provide a deeper regional insights. And this book is an invitation to dialogue. We want you as the reader and you hear the presentation today also come and dialogue with us. So, because nobody remains the same after meeting with each other. And so we are gonna start with our first chapter, which is from Dr. Faltis and Dr. Canese. And I'll just give you a brief introduction of them. So Dr. Valentina Canese holds a PhD in curriculum instruction from Arizona State University. She is a current faculty and director of the Instituto Superior de Línguas of the Faculty of Philosophy at the Universidade Nacional de Asunción, Paraguay. We have Dr. Faltis. He's gonna introduce himself and he's gonna present his chapter. Thank you so far. So we're gonna be moving now to Dr. Faltis and Dr. Canese presentation. You're sharing mine, right? Okay. There again. Here. Yes. Yes, awesome. Okay. You went through.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Christian Faltis, and I'm here today on behalf of Dr. Valentina Canese, who was my co-author, and she was the lead on this study about ideological clarity for English language teachers in Paraguay. I don't know if everybody knows about Paraguay. Paraguay is a very interesting country. It's one countries in all of North, Central, and South America where, about 63% of the population speaks an indigenous language, Guarani. And Guarani has a lot of multiple dialects depending on its location and so forth. And Guarani was established by law in 1992 to become a national language. Oh, and esto. Okay. Our focus today is going to be on ideological clarity, what it's like to teach English in classrooms in Paraguay, in the private schools and some public schools, and to look at the teaching practices of those teachers who are teaching English in Paraguay. All right. Let me go down. Le voy para abajo. Okay. Okay, gracias. So here you see that it's a bilingual nation. It speaks Spanish and Guarani, and there's also a use of what's called Chopara, or some people say Chopara. And this is where there's translanguaging between the dynamic bilingualism between Chopara and Guarani and Spanish. And it's used among quite a few of the people throughout the country. And, Dr. Canese is the expert on this, and I feel a little bit, out of my comfort zone here, but I have read many, many papers that have been written by scholars in Paraguay or scholars who study in Paraguay about the Chopara and Guarani in the schools and things like that. In this paper, we're looking at. Let me see the next one here. Go down. Esto. ¿Cuál es? Esto. Okay. We're going to be looking at the idea of ideological clarity. And so we're asking, you'll see that we had about 8 teachers, and we're talking about their understanding of pure and perfect language ideologies. Because most of the people who work in language teaching, at least in my experience over the past 40 years or so, have taken on some ideologies about language that says that, there is something like a pure language and we shouldn't mix languages, and that there's like you speak perfect Brazilian, or you speak perfect Spanish or perfect Guarani or whatever it is. There's this perfect language ideology that if you want to use a perfect sort of standard academic variety of language, then that has to be pure. You can't mix it with other languages like we do with translanguaging. And then we also bring in racial linguistics, from Jonathan Rosas and Flores Nelson, about how people who hear the so-called mixing of 2 languages, that impure language, how they racialize a person as being less capable than a person who speaks purely English or purely Spanish or purely Portuguese or purely English, those kinds of things. So we wanted to know, we had 8 teachers that Dr. Canese was able to get and ask them if they could sit down and talk to us or talk to her about some ideas. We're asking the questions: how and to what extent do English teachers in Paraguay, take up pure and perfect language ideologies while teaching bilingual learners English? And in what ways do English teachers in Paraguay exhibit ideological clarity about pure and perfect language ideologies? Oops, with respect, well, that microphone just crashed on me. With respect to bilingualism. So we situate the study, within 3 major frameworks: the dominant language ideologies in Paraguay and other bilingual countries with respect to pure and perfect language use and learning, dynamic bilingualism or translanguaging versus language mixing, and racial linguistics, the idea that the way certain people use language is not considered good enough. So I just mentioned that there. So go to the next slide here. We interviewed, Dr. Canese interviewed 8 teachers, and then the 2 of us did a qualitative analysis of those responses to the questions. We were looking at things like what their approaches and methodologies to teaching English is, how students' bilingual or home language use was taken up in the classroom, whether the teachers encouraged students to translanguage in the classroom, how their approach to error correction, both local and global errors, and the feedback that they gave them, the ways that they use different resources and materials in their classroom, and the challenges they mentioned about teaching English in Paraguay. Because as you know, there mainly would be English in the classroom, but there are not a lot of places, situations, contexts for English to be used in many parts of Paraguay. And then we also asked about their motivations for teaching English in Paraguay. Okay, so let me see what we did here next here. The findings. Well, these are pretty standard things here. We found that there was a preference among all of the teachers for using and teaching standard sometimes referred to as academic English. And that's understandable. I've taught English in a number of South American countries and in Central America, and there's the materials that you have are all in some sort of a standard English form. And as you're getting your students to learn how to have communicative competence and be able to interact with their language, there's a push towards making sure that the students use a standard language. We also found that there was sort of mixed views on whether or not teachers should encourage students to translanguage in their English classrooms. And I should mention that the teachers here, some of them taught standard American English, and some of them taught standard British English. And so you have two of these colonial powers that their languages come in, and then they're taught. And so we don't know a lot about their preparation for the teaching English, but based upon what they talked about in their classrooms and how they viewed mixed, what they considered to be mixed translanguaging in the classroom, they tended not to mix, and they tended not to. They tended to have a monolingual approach, let's say, to teaching English in the classroom. There also was we talked about error correction and the idea that there are some local ways of speaking that can communicate an idea, and how it is that the teachers would respond to those, even if they had what would consider to be errors, and versus a global error, where the response that they give either in written English or in oral English is not comprehensible. And so you would have to, because we're eliciting and interpreting their thinking. And how is it that when they respond to a question or a comment, can we make sense of that and then, and expand their thinking in English? And there was a focus, quite a few of the teachers, I use lots of videos and apps, and my classes focus on students' needs and interests. And another one mentioned they incorporate cultural elements into lessons to make learning more relatable and effective. So there were some of the teachers that, really wanted the students to develop sort of a communicative way of using language. And those teachers, I think, were the ones that were more open to translanguaging and less focused on error correction as a way to teach English. So let's go to the next one here. The challenges, well, the two challenges, there was not really enough, according to the teachers, there wasn't enough time for them to complete all of the curriculum content that they were expected to do within a class. And so so they're really pressured. And the standardized curriculum course put pressures on them, so they would have to go through lessons, lesson 1, lesson 2, lesson 3, as opposed to meeting the needs of the kids, the students where they were, and being able to sort of support their developing communication. So we learned that there was a split between English teachers who prefer to correct students' errors whenever they occurred, and English teachers who opt to provide delayed feedback to avoid interruptions and the flow of communication, and as long as the language produced was comprehensible. So there were teachers like that. So that's good. Let me see. 2 minutes, all right. And then so our recommendations were right on, boy, perfect timing, are, really to in the preparation of teachers who are going to be teaching English as a second language, just like those who are going to be teaching in Guarani and Espanol. We want them to promote and value multilingualism, and value and understand that there are many kinds of Englishes, and we don't necessarily have to only introduce and promote a standard variety of English, be it British or American English, and also to rethink and understand the role of error correction. The idea, and I go back way back from, the Goofacon, I use that stuff from the 70s, but the idea that there are local and global errors and how it is that we're eliciting and interpreting student thinking and then providing opportunities for them to continue the conversation. As long as they are continuing that conversation, they're listening to me or to someone else speak in the classroom, and they're interacting in the language, that is going to help them become more proficient in the language. And error correction can really hold that down. And as Steve Krashen says, it could create situations where their affective filters goes up and they feel embarrassed even to speak in the language. Also, the use of technology, they have to learn new ways. And as AI comes in on the language of how it is that we bring in AI to an English language teaching class is relatively new. And so we want to enrich their experiences and provide additional help with them to use technology in ways that facilitate their development. So with that, I'm going to stop and I'm going to leave it now. Dr. Canese is going to take questions and anything like that. So here we go. Gracias.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Dr. Faltis and Dr. Canese. We are going to move to the second presentation, and I'm going to have the questions to the end. So we are going to move now to the third chapter of our book, and who's gonna present is gonna be Dr. Tonelli and Dr. Egido. So Dr. Tonelli, she has a master and a PhD in language studies and 3 postdoctoral degrees. She is an associate professor at Londrina State University, and she's current a National Council for the Scientific and Technological Development Productivity Fellow in Brazil, and her main research interests are language teacher education and language education to young learners. And then we have Dr. Egido. He holds an MA and a PhD in language studies. He's an assistant professor at Paraguay State University, and his main research interests are critical decolonial English, language teacher education, and ethics in research. I'm gonna let you two to share your screen, okay?
I believe you can see it full screen, right?
Yes.
Yes,
Okay.
we can. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm
So
so sorry.
thank you
We have
so
12
much,
minutes.
everyone, for joining us.
You have 12 minutes. I'm gonna be counting here. Okay?
Well,
Sorry. 12 minutes to present. Thank you.
Okay.
Sorry to interrupt you.
Okay. So thank you again, everyone, for joining us. I am Alves Egido, and I'm here with my dear colleague, Juliana Tonelli. We're going to very briefly talk about the chapter we co-authored entitled "We Don't Need Another Hero, Valuing Ongoing Local Praxiologies in the Teaching of English to Very Young Learners in Brazil." So we start this chapter with an opening provocation in the sense of this question: do we indeed need another hero? And the hero metaphor here relates to the idea of prescriptive top-down national guidelines that would save, somehow, the teaching of English to very young learners in Brazil from its non-legitimized status. So I think it would be important to say that in public settings in Brazil, the teaching of English to very young learners, we do not have a national guideline. And for some time, it has been seen as a lack of legitimacy when it comes to how to teach young learners or very young learners. And our point with this chapter is that do we actually need one more guideline, one more top-down national guideline prescribing the teacher's work? Couldn't we think it differently? And this is what we try to do. So the English language teachers, in our viewpoint, they are the heroes who daily create praxiologies to promote a more just, equitable, and contextually sensitive education. So putting it simply, our answer with this chapter is no, we don't need another hero, another guideline. Teachers themselves are the heroes through their daily praxiologies. So the savior narrative here, which would be this national guidelines positioned as heroes that would somehow rescue the teaching of English to very young learners from its lack of legitimacy. So we want to question this narrative. And we do so by adopting this theoretical framework with the three decolonial actions that are proposed by Professor Menezes de Souza and collaborators in their publication in 2019. And in that publication, Menezes de Souza suggests three actions or three verbs that we could use when conducting a decolonial study: identify, interrogate, and interrupt. So, according to him, we should identify instances of coloniality. And in our work, we try to identify the instances of coloniality in the teaching of English to very young learners, the academic discourse. So we analyzed that a lot of master dissertations and PhD theses, they would call for these normative documents. They would say that in order for the area to be legitimate, we would need those documents. And then our point is, let's try to identify those instances of coloniality first of all. Then we interrogate with critical questions about why we really need those top-down guidelines, if they are really necessary. And the last phase would be to interrupt these instances of coloniality. And we could do so by valuing emergent and context-dependent local praxiologies. And here, we believe it's important to define what we understand by praxiologies. So according to Conti and Avelar, two Brazilian applied linguists, praxiologies, which comes from the Freirean framework, would refer to the reading of what we do, imbued with who we are and what we think, built by our culture and elements that constitute them. So trying to identify, first of all, the instances of coloniality. So the first phase, according to Menezes de Souza, we looked at some publications that we have from Brazilian applied linguists in order to identify this modern colonial assumption. And we noticed that Brazilian scholars have long viewed the lack of national guidelines for the teaching of English to very young learners as problematic, unfortunate, and detracting. So the underlying premise here is that normative documents would somehow guarantee language education success. And I believe we could all think about our own contexts in which we have a lot of normative documents. And we know that it somehow does not guarantee success when it comes to the language education itself. And in our viewpoint, this assumption reflects a colonial posture asking and waiting for some normative to say who, when, and or how the teaching of English to very young learners should happen. On the right of the screen, we brought some examples from some of those publications, but then our point is that the call for national guidelines reflect this dependency mindset, waiting for external authority to validate local practices rather than recognizing the knowledge that already exists in classrooms across Brazil. So how did we identify those instances of coloniality in the publications? We looked first of all to 133 master dissertations and PhD theses that were initially analyzed by Felice Research Group, which is the group coordinated by Dr. Tonelli. And they have a beautiful website with all these publications already categorized by themes. And these ones are the themes: languages teaching to children, teacher education, bilingualism, and assessment. And what we did was we looked at some of those publications that were already categorized by the group in order to identify those instances in which the scholars would be calling for those guidelines. But what these studies also revealed in our viewpoint is that these 133 studies, they show us that teachers are already implementing micro-situated practices to meet the contextual realities. We also noticed that local praxeologies already exist. They just haven't been recognized as legitimate by the academia. By looking at these publications, we also noticed that teachers are already creating contextually appropriate materials and approaches. So our point here is that it's not a problem of not having what to do in the classroom because we do not have prescriptive documents. The problem is finding a way to legitimize what teachers are already doing in terms of their praxeologies. So now I turn to Dr. Tonelli.
Thank you, Dr. Egido. So moving on, we brought here some examples of studies, as Dr. Egido has already said. So one of them was conducted by Ana Paula Lima, and she proposes, she created during her PhD dissertation, she created this document, this guideline, with the teachers that she was working with. So this is one example of how in the chapter we tried to show that despite not having those official guidelines, we do have initiatives, local initiatives that can inspire documents. But unfortunately, this is not what happens, at least in Brazil, right? We would like politicians, everybody who is in charge of making those educational linguistic policies to first try to identify what has been done already by those who are really in the English classroom with young and very young learners. So from our perspective, this study conducted by Dr. Lima shows us that teachers, they are the protagonists, right? Because they took ownership of their professional development. So they were in charge of what was being carried out in that context. It was extremely collaborative. So the document, the proposal in that context, it's in the state of São Paulo. It was created by them. So they created municipal guidelines. So this is a very important study for us because from our perspective, they did not wait for national policy. They made it by themselves. Also, they broke with hierarchies because they took responsibility for proposing guidelines. So with that, they challenged traditional power structures. Next one, please, Alex. Thank you. So here we brought some critical questions to interrogate this coloniality assumption. So what have scholars learned so far? What have we learned from them? What is really supporting the calls for nationwide normative documents? Why do we need them? Are they important? Yes, they are. But since we do not have them and we have teachers' praxeologies, do we really need another hero besides those who are in the classroom daily teaching English to young and very young learners? What concepts of education, language, assessment, and teachers' agency really orient the calls? What may the field lose if the calls for such a document are answered? We have been discussing this issue because since we do not have official guidelines, teachers can be the protagonists. They can take over agency. What may the field gain if official guidelines are published without the contribution of those who are really involved in teaching English to young learners, which is very likely to happen according to our experience here in Brazil? So with these questions, we challenged the field to examine assumptions and consider whose knowledge is really being valued. So we are going to very briefly bring here a framework which was proposed by me and some other scholarships. So unfortunately, we are not going to have time to go over it. But in this proposal, this framework, we proposed, first of all, we mapped cities or municipalities that were offering English before sixth grade, when it becomes compulsory here in Brazil. After mapping, we carried out focus groups to identify teachers' praxiologies because we didn't want to come up with a proposal without actually taking into consideration what the teachers were already doing, despite of, again, not having official guidelines. After that, we analyzed existing local documents. After that, we came up with 6 principles. The first of them, ludicity. The second one, cross-disciplinarity. The third one, multiple literacies, interculturality, whole child, and a proposal of teaching English to young learners by a genre-based approach. So we believe that who are the real heroes? Teachers, because they are the real policymakers. So we would have to reframe the narrative that we do need official guidelines, because again, we are pretty much sure that if we had one or if we have one, the real heroes will not be heard. So with that, we have here on my left the traditional view of guidelines, and then what we proposed in the chapter, a decolonial view. So from a traditional perspective, teachers wait for guidelines. On the other hand, teachers can create guidelines by their own practice and experience. Instead of having this problem, the experimental practice as a problem, the experimental practice is living praxis. So why not incorporating those practices or those praxiologies in official guidelines or framework? We could understand that a national document would be somehow a solution. But on the other hand, from this decolonial view, we understand that local praxiologies are already working solutions. They are more feasible, they are doable, they are real because they come from the teachers. Instead of having a top-down policy from this traditional view, why not having a bottom-up, community-driven approach which would have this decolonial view? So according to Mignolo, the concept of coloniality has opened up the reconstruction and the restitution of silenced histories, repressed subjectivities, and subalternized knowledges. So we do believe that by hearing those teachers from the classroom, we have this shift from viewing teachers as merely recipients of policy and start recognizing them as creators of knowledge and practice, which already happens according to the studies. So as final remarks, why not writing back and show what has been already done? So we believe that in this chapter, we identified what the problem is in terms of national guidelines. We interrogated the necessity and who is really in charge of proposing them. And we understand that by showing what the teachers are already doing with their praxeologies, we did interrupt this cycle by valuing local praxeologies. So for our last argument, our ultimate argument, we do believe that there is no longer the need for such a prescriptive language policy. What seems to be necessary is the interruption of the modern or colonial argument that supports those calls. We understand that we have some implications for policy and practice. So for policymakers, it would be necessary to recognize local praxeologists to support teacher agency and fund community-driven curriculum development. For teachers, educators, of course, we would have to train teachers to document and also theorize their own praxeologies. Actually, I think that we would have to motivate them to do that because many times they do not see themselves as capable of theorizing their own praxeologies. Also, we would have to validate what they already do in classroom and create spaces for more collaborative and knowledge production. And for researchers, there is this need to study what teachers are already doing successfully, also to position teachers as knowledge producers, not just implementers, and of course, to interrupt colonial logics in our research and research methodologies. So I think this is our references very briefly. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you, Alex, for sharing the screen.
Your
Karina, I'm
microphone
afraid
is
you are
off.
muted.
Hello, can you hear?
Yes, now we
Okay.
can.
Okay, thank you. So we're gonna be moving now to the last presentation. Yeah, okay. So I am Karina de Paula. I am an assistant professor of education at Oklahoma Panhandle State University, and I'm also a PhD candidate in the program of critical instruction at Texas Tech University. I defended my dissertation in 2 months. I'm almost there. Yeah. So I'm gonna be presenting my chapter here, which is the chapter 6. So it's called The Breaking Silence, a Poetic Reflections on Liberation in the Brazilian American Classrooms. And I just wanna ask the audience if you know Paulo Freire. Have you read Paulo Freire? Yes. Okay. So this chapter actually it's a mini chapbook of poems in which I wrote in my second year of my doctoral after having a course called American Education. We read 6 books of Paulo Freire, 6 books in the course. So while I was reading that book, our final assignments were to be writing poems. So, and then I have my bachelor's degree from Brazil, Universidade Federal de São Carlos. I graduated in 2006 with my bachelor's degree over there. I have been teaching English, Portuguese teacher education since 2004, 22 years now, so long. And I did my master's degree at Texas Tech University in applied linguistics. So, and for me, teaching language was like, if you want to learn English, you have to hear from me, learning English only, and speaking like a native speakers. When I was teaching Portuguese, that was my goal as well. However, when I went to my doctoral in my second year that I was reading Paulo Freire, all my assumptions, I was changed. So I was changed by Freire, and I really, really wish that I had learned about Freire when I was doing my master's, when on my undergrad program. I would be a different teacher. So in this chapter, actually, so I bring it to not good experience that I had when I was starting teaching. So the first one was when I was teaching English in a Language Institute. I was teaching a class for working students. They were low income adults, and they were coming to my class on Monday and Thursday, 8 to 40 p.m. to 10 p.m. was 1 hour and a half every day. Imagine after 8:30 p.m., those were my students. And I refused to speak in Portuguese. They were beginners. I only spoke in English, and they were awesome. But then I had 12 students, 5 of them dropped my class because I refused to speak in Portuguese to them. I was explaining past simple rules, all in English. I refused to speak Portuguese. And at that time, I thought, oh, that's a communicative approach. That's how I learned it. I have to do so here. But at that time, I didn't look to my students, who they were, why they want to learn English. And that's what happened. And then I had another not good experience in 2008. There was a contest, and I passed in a contest. I was teaching English in a public school in Brazil. I was a middle school teacher. I taught 5th grade, 6th grade, 7th grade. I had 9 classes, 9 courses, 300 students. Yeah, and then I went there my second year after graduating, teaching English, but my students, they didn't want to learn English. They said, I'm not even speaking Portuguese, why do I have to learn English? They didn't want to learn English, and they were not respectful, and then I didn't know how to deal with indiscipline in the classroom. I started to have mental issues. I started to have insomnia on the days that I had to be teaching at school, and then I started to have insomnia every day. And then was very, very traumatic. I couldn't give up that job, because if I give up that job, I have to pay a kind of a penalty. Whatever I would receive the entire year, I had to pay back. I couldn't. And when I started to take medicines to be sleeping, and then on that year, I had a motorcycle accident. I was stopped I was forced to stop teaching. And then I said, you know what, from now on, I will only be teaching language institutes. I can't deal with public school anymore. So, and then this traumatic experience, when I was reading Paulo Freire in 2022, so almost 15 years later, that I was understanding my traumas. And then I say, oh, if I had learned Freire before, I would be working differently. I'll not have this traumatic experience. So my call here is for future teacher educators, the value of learning Paulo Freire and what he does to a teacher. And that's how here it was a very transformative. So I work my dissertation, I work with translanguaging. So, and then I accept this difference. I accept learning, speaking with accents and mixing language. That's who I am. So now I embrace it, this transformation. I say transformation. So, and that's what my chapter is about. So Freire was really a healing power for me. So he healed my older traumas. I learned to trust myself, finding freedom in teaching and forgiving my past mistakes. It was a guiding principle to love. It was so the love here implicated a fight against my self-centered. So not me, but my students, what they need, why they want to learn English or why they are there. So, and then I really embraced translanguage and my accented identity. And then that's when I come to my first poem. This first poem is called I Am Americano Too. I wrote here from the perspective of a student who has an educator that trusts in them. So this is my poem. So I am Americano too. So I hear these other Americans singing the variety and the diversity. My teacher told me I can make a difference. I live in South America, but I am Americano too. I speak English with an accent, but I am Americano too. I might not speak as a native speaker, but I am Americano too. I mix words, I know, but I am Americano too. And it's all right. Está tudo bem. I am Americano too. My culture is different, but I am Americano too. This is who I am. I am Americano too. In the original poems, here was really a transformation. I was marking down with I really want to mark down and see this transformation that I went through when I was even preparing this poem to be published here. So, and this poem is more like a problem-solving methodology in which I accept dialogue, reinvention, a critical framework, embracing that multilingual identity, empower my students to speak anyways, despite of their accents or accepting who they are. And then I come here to the second poem that is an American sentence. So the poem came from this: love is an act of courage, not fear. Love is commitment to others. I had to create a poem just kind of mixing out the words. So love is an act of courage, not fear. Love is commitment to others. We ought to love with courage if we are to show commitment to others. Therefore, commitment to others is demonstrated by loving, fearless, and courageous. So in this poem here is a call to progressive educators, urging educators in Brazil and Latin America to look at public school students with love, find strength, faith, and humility to fight the oppressive neoliberal ideology and the capitalism, and to allow us a passion for teaching to liberate our students. So, and then I'm gonna come here to my fourth poem, in which we have the sentence: dialogue further requiring intensive faith in humankind. And each word of the poem has to be the last word of each line of the poem. And then it is, so how can I dialogue if I feel locked? And I feel I cannot go further. So this is as a teacher dialogue and be reflecting. So how can I dialogue if I feel locked and I feel I cannot go further? Why? For me, it's simple. It just requires someone with an open mind and an intense desire and little faith that the oppressed people can live in this world and be part of the humankind. And then I had the last poem is a blackout poem. I was reading the second year, I was writing a paper about the critical language education in Brazil. So I was reading Paulo Freire, but also Brazilian educators. And this blackout poem is like so we just take a page of whatever reading, you mark everything in black and just choose some words to be part of the poem. This is the fourth poem. But what is really here is how I grew up as a scholar, how I grew up as a critical scholar. So I adopted the inside-out stance. I rejected the language barriers and the abstract thinking, and I embraced translanguaging. So this is what I became when I learned Paulo Freire. And then I finish with this sentence from Brazil. Brazilian never give up. Brasileiro não desiste nunca. It's a tribute to Paulo Freire, because Paulo Freire, he was brave enough to trust in humans. He radiated love for life in all his works, and he refused to give up on humanity. So this is my transformation of a healing and voice. Paulo Freire healed all my traumas as a novice educator. And then I finish by saying, thanks, Paulo Freire, for believing in me. And I can write back, I am Americana também. E tenho muito orgulho, I'm so proud of that. So, yes, thank you. This is the third presentation. I'll move now to Dr. Zombek. He's going to be the discussant of this symposium.
Do that. For the other, were they gonna respond to questions?
Yes, and now we are going to be responding to questions also.
Yeah, morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Can you hear me well?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, I mean, despite the technology challenges, I really enjoyed today's panel. I think just like the title, Latin American Writes Back, right? When we write back, we encounter some challenges, just like today, right? But in the end, we made it happen. I think this is, we tell them we are here, right? Like that. So I want to say thank you for inviting me to be part of this, I think, very important and timely symposium. As I reflecting upon this panel, I think I was particularly struck by the title, Latin America Writes Back, right? I think it is not just about response, but also about resistance, authorship, and epistemic agency. I think it reminds us language education is not simply about teaching and learning. It is also about who gets to produce knowledge, whose voices are heard, and whose realities are centered. I also like the idea of praxiologies, right? Like it pushes us to move beyond those dominant methods and techniques toward lived, situated, and reflective practices. What we do, how we do it, and why. Because we don't need another hero. We are already heroes. So as I engage with this panel, I also reflect upon my own positionality, right? As a Asian American whose work also primarily in Mandarin English dual language and ESL education in US and in China, who's also someone personal and intellectual trajectory is also shaped across global South and global North context. I want to say many of the tensions and possibilities discussed in these papers, I also see them in my work, right? Like so for example, EFL education in China, I also see the similar struggles, right? The dominance of standardized pure language ideologies, the marginalization of fluid hybrid translanguaging practices, and also the persistent assumption about solutions must come from top-down policies or this global. It's okay. Top-down policy, you see the pressure. Well, we need to fight back, right? Or global North frameworks. So I think for me, this panel is not only about Latin America. I think to me, it is about building transnational solidarities across contexts that are differently situated, but similarly shaped by coloniality in language education, right? So I actually want to start with your work. I think it is actually, I was really touched by your beautiful poems. And I think a lot of what you shared definitely also resonates with my personal experience, right? You said Paulo Freire, sort of like a awakening moment for you, sort of healing power to me is like translanguaging. I think the moment I start to engage with Ophelia Garcia Levy's work, I think that was healing power to me. And I start to unlearn those deficit-oriented ideologies, right? So feeling ashamed, speaking English, and even writing essays with an accent, right? To know I'm proud of, I'm a transnational multilingual writer and speaker, right? I can utilize Mandarin, Cantonese, and English, and even my hometown dialect in all the my beautiful essays, right? And I also start to, I really feel poetry is a really powerful way, right, to sort of reclaim the power, to express your identities. Actually, this semester at my own institution, I'm actually doing translingual poetry. so like to provide the space in institutions like formally to, because where I work there's a lot of first gen immigrant students. I think a lot of time their voices are unheard and their multilingualism assets are not being really seen in educational spaces in higher education. So that's why I decided to, why don't I bring translanguage and poetry together? And this is exactly what you see in your presentation. I think one thing I want to sort of like a question that maybe something that we can collectively to work on is how can we really move beyond this personal reflection really into collective classroom practice? How you really bring this into institutional spaces, right? Because I really see this as a sort of from affirming identity to enabling critical consciousness and social action. And to your paper, right, I think it really talks about this ideological structure shape practices and how important we need to cultivate ideological clarity among teachers, right? Not just what they do, but also how they understand language itself, right? How they grapple with those tensions, those pure and perfect language ideologies, right? And also, so how can we continue to promote multilingualism, right? And in different contexts. So I think not just identify those ideological struggles, but how to actively cultivate ideological clarity, and so move away just from discussion, but to really enact as action, right, in teacher education. And the last paper, thank you for your presentation. I really like the title, We Don't Need Another Hero. I think that is extremely powerful. It is a strong, compelling critique of the assumption that solutions must come from top-down policies or external authorities, right? I think instead, we need to center praxiologies, right? This idea that teaching is already a form of knowledge production shaped by teachers' lived experiences, identities, and local contexts. I think teachers, they are not waiting to be saved, right? They are already designing, adapting, theorizing, and enacting meaningful language education. I think one thing move forward is how can we really navigate the tension between teacher autonomy and those material constraints, right? Especially in under-resourced context. So I think across all the three papers, I definitely see praxis is personal and poetic transformation. Praxis is shaped by ideology, and praxis is already happening locally, collectively, and often invisibly, right? And I think if we take this panel seriously, then writing back is not just about critique, right? It is about reclaiming authorship of pedagogy, of knowledge, of language itself. So maybe the question is not what methods should we apply, right? It should be how do we recognize, sustain, and connect the praxiologies that are already being enacted. So I think also another, I want to also open up a broader invitation, right? How can we further build transnational solidarities across Latin America, Asian, and other global South and diaspora contexts by listening and learning from each other's local struggles and possibilities. So I will stop it.
Thank you so much. Well, we still have some time for questions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you very, very much. We really appreciate. So yeah, we are gonna go now. We are open to questions to the audience. So the authors, we are here. And
yes, I don't think I have a question, just a comment about the Brazilian who did the education in Brazil. You learn about from the United States. That's just ridiculous.
Yeah.
So just like I'm focused on with that, like how, so you had to come to United States to just frustrating. I'm just frustrated right now. I'm sorry.
yeah, unfortunately, I think some people are not recognized on their own land. So yeah, that's frustrating. But yeah, according to Dr. Tonelli, things are changing right now regarding the education, because I graduated 20 years ago.
Let's check.
Yes. Yes. Amy, do you want to say something?
No, about it, because I think it's actually great. You know what I mean? Because I went to Portuguese language, so yeah.
She's also Brazilian, yeah.
You know, but I went to Portuguese language. So Portuguese language, I think like, you know, it's all incorporated, but I think you went to music, right? I think your degrees in English? Yeah,
Your support.
mine is Portuguese. So I think that's the difference, and over there, everything's about the US, and Europe. Yeah.
Because my bachelor is also in English. I'm also student.
Oh,
And I never heard about writing. Yes, before my master that I got the master in still, but master in education, and then I study about writing. But just in the master degree,
Not an undergrad.
not in the undergrad.
Yes.
So makes sense.
Yeah, I had you undergrad, but again, it's
Before
all
Portuguese.
Portuguese.
Okay. Yeah, for some reason.
Yes.
Could we ask Dr. Canese, what about the prairie in Paraguay? Did you hear that?
So, sorry, I can't hear very well. Can you repeat?
Okay, the question to Dr. Canese is, what about Freire in Paraguay? Do we study Freire in universities? How does that happen in Paraguay?
Yes, Paulo Freire is studied in most education programs in Paraguay and very highly regarded. We do have also a theorist from the early 20th century, Ramon Idalecio Cardoso, who also was part of the new school movement and who had very similar ideas to, I think he was previous to Freire. So they are studied together here in Paraguay. And of course, the challenges is how do you study Freire and how do you appropriate his ideas and the way that Karina mentioned, for example, it's really powerful getting students to engage with Freire through poetry, through really delving deeply into these ideas of love and teaching as an act of love. And maybe when we understand that, teaching in that way, maybe we can also understand how no matter what our language ideologies, if we understand teaching as an act of love, we will be more open to understanding different viewpoints, different accents, different ways of being, different praxiologies. I could really relate to Dr. Tonelli's and Egido's work because here we do, I have a counter example. Here in Paraguay, we do have, Dr. Faltis mentioned, we do have a policy to teach English from preschool, but it's not really in practice throughout all schools because of constraint of natures of resources and having enough teachers to actually put this into practice. So no matter what the top-down policies are, sometimes, bottom-up, practices are more valid and effective because this is what really happens. And so I think we should start looking more at these practices and how these policies are enacted or not in the classrooms and what teachers are doing with these policies or not. And so that is really, I think, important in all situations, but most especially in language education, because many times, everything, I think Juliana mentioned, there's already so many normatives in place, and we think that, we just bring out another one and it's going to solve all the problems, but it doesn't really, it just brings new problems to the picture. And so we now have to figure out how we're going to address these new problems. So Paraguay has a very complex situation in terms of our plurilingual. We say in our constitution that we are a plurilingual country, but what that the constitution doesn't say is what do we mean by that? And so that is really a very interesting question, and that's one that we really need to question from the educational perspective, from teacher education, and also from a research perspective. So thank you for asking. I hope I answered the questions, and I brought other things to the table. I hope I didn't talk too much.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you.
Thank you.
I use poetry. I was very touched now to see your process of like, you know, how you play with the words and how you did the ball. It was very empowering to see it.
I'll say it was very challenging. Was very challenging because I say, oh, how can I be writing? I was not a poem person, a poetry person. And now this first poem, I was a struggle. I was there in a Starbucks table say, my assignment is a poem. Karina, poem is easier than writing an article paper. You got this. So it was me battle myself to try to do something. But yeah, but then I embrace it. So Freddie just will say, how can I put this into words? So yeah, so but as Dr. Zonfeng was saying, so we can bring this to the classroom and have a collective. So when I wrote this, I was a doctoral student, but now I'm a professor. So, and then how can I bring this to my class, to my future teachers? So I work in a teacher education, it's not a bilingual program, it's a teacher education, English only. My own students, they have a lot of bias, racial linguistics. I try in all my courses, I bring culture relevant pedagogy. I have a model in which we discuss that. So how they can view their students, because where I live in Oklahoma, 80% of the students in the classes in Oklahoma, they are Hispanic. We have a lot of language, but I try to bring to my students this discussion. And then I say, and I had one last week saying, so now I'm learning Spanish in Duolingo because I want to help my students. It's not their fault that they speak Spanish, but I want to help them. And I just say, wow, that was very meaningful for me to hear that, because I want to change the mind of our future teachers so they can go and make the difference and break this deficit ideology. And then help the students, especially we're in the United States. We have a lot of Hispanic here. So they can embrace that. So yes. Yes. If you we are over the time, but I wanna thank you everyone, Dr. Faltis, Dr. Zonfeng, all the audience here. I'm so sorry for all the problems that we had. So Dr. Tonelli, Dr. Egido, Dr. Canese, and you can just continue this conversation, move on with this conversation. I really, really appreciate all the time. Yeah, let's take a picture. Yeah, Doctor. Let's take a picture with we all in the Zoom. So. Yeah.
There, yes.
Please send it to us.
I'll send you.
Join us.
Should I join you?
Oh, okay.